Thank you all. I am glad to be here, and I'm impressed that you are here. I think it's such a wonderful time to gather, to be able to gather and freely express our ideas, and I always appreciate a meeting that begins with a prayer and a pledge. And I just like to remind people, in case they don't know, that is how we begin each day in the Senate, with a prayer and a pledge of allegiance, which I think is a very appropriate way to start the day. And I am old enough to have had grade school experiences where I lived in schools, lived in places where the schools began each day with a prayer or a scripture reading from the Bible and the Pledge of Allegiance. And what a great habit that was, and wouldn't that be so wonderful if that happened again? I really appreciate Oak putting this together. I do appreciate Oak and the presenters that have preceded me. I very much appreciate their comments and the work that they've done and the information that they've blessed us all with their research. They generate a lot of goodness, as do all of you, and I just need to let you know that I feel like the world is a better place when there are caring citizens who will give up their Saturday, get themselves more informed, be involved, commit themselves to things that matter. When I run, ever since I started running in 1996, which was quite a while ago, I always run with the idea of supporting the Constitution and maintaining the family as the fundamental unit of society. So a conference like this really aligns with my priorities. So it's nice to be asked to be involved. So one of my very favorite presidents, as you can imagine, and one of my favorite quotes from that favorite president is Ronald Reagan, reminding us that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed down for them to do the same, which you all obviously believe as you are caring about your children and you are being involved in participating. I also really appreciate the comments from, if I can get my little slide to work here just a sec. It's nice that there's people that are here younger than me to help me if I can't make this work. President Thomas Jefferson's very important warning that freedom is lost gradually to the uninterested, the uneducated, and the uninformed. And I salute all of you for being interested and educated and continually trying to be informed. I just have to take a little sideways step here since I care so much about the Constitution and the freedom that it gives us. I'm not going to discuss immigration today. It doesn't matter really, though, where you line up on immigration, whether you agree or disagree with what's happening with illegal immigration. I am in a state of horror, absolute panic, to think that we have somebody leading or heading the executive branch of the government who has taken an oath to support the Constitution and who totally spit on it this week, ignoring the fact that we have a process for making laws that deal with immigration. And he has chosen not to enforce those laws and instead to try to trump it. Now, I say that only because it's the kind of information that we really need to be informed about, and we really need to make sure our families are informed about. It's very frightening to me, but all of us who serve in the legislature, those who serve in law enforcement, those who serve in the city, I mean, all these elected officials, we all take an oath. That's not just a perfunctory little act. That is a serious issue. We take an oath to support the Constitution of the United States. And when I think about those great men who signed the Constitution, worked diligently for it, was kind of like signing a death warrant, but it created a great plan for governance and for families and communities to thrive. I'm so grateful for what they did. Just a little side note, I wasn't planning to do this, but by chance, does anybody here know who the youngest signer of the Constitution was? Well, I won't embarrass you because it's not a name that we all hear when we talk about the founders, but it was a man named Jonathan Dayton. And Jonathan Dayton was only 26 years old. I mean, that is a very young, educated person. But the reason I bring that up is, besides the fact that I like his last name, you know, we hear about the founders and we hear about those great men, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and Sam Adams and George Washington and those great people involved. But we don't hear about Jonathan Dayton. But this is what I like about Jonathan Dayton. He was where he needed to be, and he did what he was supposed to do, and he voted. He might not have had time to do all of the major founding work, but he did what needed to be done, and hopefully that's all of us. I mean, all of us might not be remembered for some major thing, but if we can be where we're supposed to be and do what we're supposed to do and participate in an appropriate way, we can make the world a better place. And Jonathan Dayton's vote was needed, and your voice is needed, and so I'm very glad that you're here today. So I really do love and appreciate and honor the Constitution, and it reminds me that this month, some very important events have taken place, 4 important events. First of all, we all had a chance to vote, very sacred opportunity for which many people have paid the ultimate price. And secondly, we also had Veterans Day, and those are 2, to me, very sacred holidays. I grew up in a military family. The first thing I remember about my father is that he was not home. I was just a little girl, and I was dressed up for Halloween, and I could not believe he wouldn't come home to see what I was going to be for Halloween. But he wasn't there for Thanksgiving either, and he wasn't there for Christmas, and I mean, he was gone because he was in the occupational forces after Korea. And I know a little bit about the sacrifices of military families. So if I can just pause right here as I'm naming these 4 important events in November. If there is anyone here who has served in the military, will you please stand so that we can honor you? I think that's always important. Thank you. We do have some. Thank you both. Thank you. 3. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I don't think we can ever neglect an opportunity to thank these people who have helped provide us the freedom that we can meet on a Saturday and pick the topic we want and have these discussions. Okay, one of the third things that happened this month, this might not be as important to all of you, but to me it is important. It might not be as well known, but on November 17th, does anybody know what November 17th was? It was the 143rd birthday of the NRA. And whether or not you are a gun owner or a member of the NRA, of which I am both, to me, it is a reaffirmation of the importance of the Bill of Rights. And that is also important, and that's another one of our freedoms. And of course, one of the other great events of this month is Thanksgiving, and we all have so much for which to be thankful. And our understanding of our role as parents and grandparents and citizens and elected officials and school board members and school officials and whatever we are, those are some of the very things for which we can be thankful. Now, a few years ago, my sister gave me this sweet little book. I don't know if you've seen it, When Life Was Simpler, that talks about a time in American life which I think must have been the very end of that frightening period that we heard about today from Dr. Flinders, when the changes were taking place. But it seems like we remembered some very simpler times. I wanted to put this little picture up because there's so much to learn just from the pictures from the kids that we're in. But I like this picture of this school, and I want to talk to you about this school for a minute. It looks like a school that I went to. I told you my dad was in the military, so we were a military family, which means we moved a lot. So I was born in Washington State, and that's where I went to kindergarten. And I went to first grade in a school just outside Sacramento. And then my dad was stationed again in Massachusetts, and so I went to second grade in a school just outside of Boston, in Springfield. It looked very much like this school. I love it. And then I went to third grade in Roswell, New Mexico. He was transferred again. I'm not going to tell you my whole school history, but I'm telling you that because in this military family that I was in, and by the time I was in the 4th grade, I had gone to school in 4 different states. Somehow my siblings and I adjusted just fine to the school curriculum without Common Core. And that seems to be one of the big arguments that we have to have. Thank you. That we have to have Common Core, and the argument is so that if kids move, and I'm thinking, well, that's the exception. Why don't we address the rule instead of the exception? And the rule is most of us don't move a lot. Military families do, and there are reasons people move, but families can adjust and children can adjust, especially if the parents are in charge of the education. Anyway, I just love the lessons that are in these pictures. The traditions of the dad providing and the mother home and the clothing and what they did in the evening. And I just love looking at this little book and thinking, you know, there are issues that are being taught in the school that we cannot forget. So somebody came along when I was in grade school and decided that everybody was tired of Dick and Jane. And I don't know why they thought that, because we weren't. Dick and Jane and See Spot Run, and those were a very effective way of teaching reading, and they taught so many other lessons just by looking at the pictures, and frankly, I think these are such sweet stories, and to me, so much more effective than Heather Has Two Mommies. I really love this kind of teaching and these kinds of lessons that are so good for us to have. So my responsibility today is to talk about your rights as parents in the school system. And this is no small thing. I'm like you, I'm a parent, and I'm a parent by choice, and that is my very sacred responsibility, and I don't look to the schools as the option for me to have somebody else raise my children. As a matter of fact, the first day of school was always the most traumatic day of the year for me. Every year I could hardly bear that my children had become old enough to go to school. And so I never took my kids on the first day of school. My husband always had to do it because I was crying thinking somebody, not even who I necessarily chose, but somebody gets to have my children for their best waking hours. And I want them. I was loving the time I had with them before they went to school, when we got up in the morning and did our family reading and our family devotionals, and we practiced the piano together, and we had our time together. And then they were gone, and by the time they came home in the afternoon, you know, they were kind of tired, and I would try to pick up then and do the parenting things that I wanted to do. And I looked with envy at the Finnish model. In Finland, they think that children shouldn't go to school until they're 8. That's an interesting age, isn't it? Till they're 8 years old, and that the numbers of adults in their lives up until that time are adequate numbers of supervision. There doesn't seem to be this urgency to make sure that these little kids are socialized and involved and attending organized schooling events so that they learn how to socialize. So one of the things that I have been very opposed to in the legislature is the all-day kindergarten. It just grieved my heart when this all-day kindergarten thing happened. I want to tell you a little bit about it because I did mention that I went to kindergarten in Washington State, and I went to kindergarten, and it was a 2 or 3 days a week thing, and I went to kindergarten in the basement of the Lutheran church, which was nearby, and all the little kids in the community that wanted to go, if their parents wanted them to be involved, could attend church in the Lutheran community, and it was great. We went to a Lutheran church and the Lutheran school, but it was not Lutheran teaching, but it was okay. I mean, we did sing "Onward Christian Soldiers" as we went in, and I thought it was great too. But we had this idea of children going to kindergarten for a few days a week if it worked for them and their parents, and it was something that they liked before they started going to regular education. So then I get into the legislature decades later, and they're talking about how we really need to make all-day kindergarten the rule so that the kids are more ready for first grade. And that would be following some of the European and Asian models where they said, we really do need the kids to go to all-day kindergarten so they're ready for first grade. And then the next year they realized, but what we need to do is require them to go to half-day as 4-year-olds so that they're ready for all-day kindergarten. And of course you can see where that morphed, because a few years later, then they said, we're just a few years behind it. Then they said, well, if the kids went to school all day as 4-year-olds, they would be able to handle all-day kindergarten better, and it'd be easier for them to handle that all-day 4-year preschool if we start them into the government schools at age 3 for half a day. I mean, these kinds of things just break my heart. And we see this happening in other countries, and it just breaks my heart to think that it's even being considered. In our nation, I fought very hard against the all-day kindergarten, and to some people I look like a real heretic, but I feel very strongly that the children are happier in the homes. That's a very young time for them to be away from their parents, from their mother, from the nurturing that takes place in the home. Besides that, I just think it's healthier too. I mean, you look at all the, well, we won't address the cooties issue, but anyway. Parents play a very unique and distinctive and irreplaceable role in the lives of their children. And while it should go without saying that parents have natural rights over the decisions regarding their children's health and education and general welfare, there are many forces striving to take away those rights. I want to talk about 2 or 3 things that are in Utah law so that you know about it. About 12 or 13 years ago, my very own senator, when she was in the House, was able to put into statute something that I really appreciate, and this is what it says. the primary responsibility for the education of children within the state resides with the parents or guardians, and that role of the state and the local government is to support and assist the parents in fulfilling that responsibility. Basically, what we're saying in that was that the schools are there to assist the parents in educating their children, not that the parents are there to help the schools. The schools are not the fundamental unit of society. I know some people think that, but I'm still committed to the idea that the families are the fundamental unit and the schools are there to help. So if you want to look that up in Utah Code, that is 53A-13-109, where it says the responsibility for the education of children within the state, this is the state of Utah, resides with the parents or guardians, and that the role of the state and local governments is to support and assist the parents. So it's good for us to have that background knowledge first so that we understand what our rights and options are, and that it is recognized in code. Now, I mean, who would have thought that that ever needed to be put into law? I remember when that was being discussed in the Education Committee. I mean, you could feel the tension of people that didn't want to vote for that, you know. No, that's really not what schools are about. But you know, who dared to stand up in that setting and say, no, the most important unit is the schools and the parents are there to support it? And so it passed, and it's in our code as a basis for all of us to understand. Then Utah law further provides, quote, that parents retain the fundamental right and duty to exercise primary control over the care, supervision, upbringing, and education of their children. This is still a quote. There is a rebuttable presumption that a parent's decisions are in the child's best interests. Now, if you want to look that up in Utah Code, that is 30-5A-103. Now, these are pieces of information, statute, Utah law in our code books that are in place that provides a foundational opportunity and strength and responsibility and clarification for the parents as far as their children are considered. Okay, so under both the United States Constitution and the Constitution of this state, a parent possesses fundamental liberty for the care and the custody and the management of the children. That's the way it's always been. At times, I'm just going to talk about how difficult it is. I'm not going to read all the code, but there are places in, let me tell you, rights of parents, children's rights, interests and responsibilities of the states. That's in Utah Code 62A-4A-201 that talks about how the constitutions of this state and the Constitution of the United States say that parents possess a fundamental liberty and interest in the care and custody of their children, and that even when their children are temporarily taken away, that should not be an easy process, and the parent should still have say in how that is going to, what's going to happen to that child and how they're going to be able to return to the parent home. Now, because of clear Utah law, Utah courts have a history of upholding fundamental rights of parents and the decisions of their children. So I want to morph just a little and talk about how Utah law has been strengthened by the Supreme Court and the Constitution, because on a national level, the Supreme Court has recognized that parental rights in multiple decisions, but their wording starts to get a little mushier through the years. 90 years ago, they had verbiage in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in a ruling in a well, it was more like in the 1940s. So it wasn't quite 90 years ago, but this was a ruling where there was a challenge of the parents to against the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it was taken to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruling in favor of the parents said, "It is cardinal within us that the custody, care, and nurture of the child reside first in the parents, whose primary function and freedom include preparation for obligations the state can neither supply nor hinder." So that's language that was always just presumed. It was put into a ruling in the Supreme Court in the early 1940s. Then in 1972, when there was a question about requiring Amish children to be placed in compulsory education, or government schools as I call it, there was again a ruling by the Supreme Court where the Supreme Court ruling says, and I quote, "The history and culture of Western civilization reflect a strong tradition of parental concern for the nurture and upbringing of their children. This primary role of parents in the upbringing of their children is now established beyond debate as an enduring American tradition. I love those words, the parental right. The primary role of the parents in the upbringing of their children is now established, this is Supreme Court speaking in 1972, beyond debate as an enduring American tradition. Then I need to tell you the language gets a little mushier, and this is where we kind of need to be really tuned in and aware. In 2000, there was a Supreme Court ruling, the United States it's called Troxel versus Granville, a ruling handed down from the Supreme Court concerning the parameters of parental decision-making and the enforceability of the decisions affecting the United Nations Convention of Rights of the Child. Now, let's back up again. When I was elected as a senator, I took an oath to support the Constitution of this state and the Constitution of the United States, and I do not swear any allegiance to the United Nations, and nor do I agree with the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which all sounds, thank you. Thank you. I'm always glad to speak to people who align themselves with, we align ourselves with the same thinking. This, you know, this Convention of the Rights of the Child, I mean, it has the same kind of fuzzy title, just like, No Child Left Behind does. I mean, No Child Left Behind has such a great title, but who cares about that? I mean, they're saying no child left behind from the government, but we are now talking about, no, they're trying to say they want to have total control, and that whole No Child Left Behind book, which is a big, thick book, is not about leaving children behind. It's about leaving the parents behind and making decisions on the child. So this ruling was very, very important because the 2000, addressing the United Nations and the rights of the child, there was a proposal made in Congress to have an amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And this amendment advocates that, well, let me just read you the very language. It says, the liberty of parents to direct the upbringing and education of their children is a fundamental right. Now, we all agree with that. And then it says, neither the United States nor any state shall infringe on this right without demonstrating that it is the government in the governmental interest as applied to the person of the highest order and not otherwise served. I'm not sure about. Then it says, no treaty, now we're going to agree with this, may be adopted, nor shall any source of international law may be employed to supersede, modify, interpret, or apply to the rights guaranteed by this article. Now, this is important because this is an ongoing discussion. This particular proposed amendment to the U.S. Constitution, that's what this is proposed as. It was first introduced by Jim DeMint in the Senate. I'm trying to find where it was. I'm sorry, I'm not finding where where the people were that supported it, but it was people that we would normally understand their perspective on strengthening family and parental rights. So in 2000, it was Representative Hoekstra from Republican from Michigan. This was in 2009. He had 142 co-sponsors for this particular parental rights amendment to the Constitution, and Jim DeMint ran it in the Senate at the same time that it was being run in the House. In both of those bodies, that particular amendment proposal was referred to their judiciary and no further action was taken. But then in 2011, Representative John Fleming proposed it again, and there was a lot more interest in it and people were talking about it. Let me just tell you, in spite of the fact that there are things here that we can all align ourselves with, this great concern that no treaty shall be adopted or have any control to supersede, modify, or interpret the rights of the parents, the opposition says this, we need to make sure that we hold parental rights separately from federal law, and that we express concern that the constitutional amendment could federalize the family, thus granting the government the power to give, define, limit, regulate, or take away parental rights. So if we give the government the power to define the family rights, then we might also have given them the power to take away the family rights, which is kind of a serious discussion that we need to involve ourselves in when we hear that this parental rights amendment to the Constitution of the United States is being discussed, because we have the neighboring state of Idaho and 3 or 4 other states have passed this on a state level, saying that we would like to have this amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And I am very concerned about federalizing anything. I don't want to federalize education. I don't want to federalize the family. I don't want to federalize water. I think one of my responsibilities as a state legislator is to make sure that we maintain the rights of the legislature to take care of in the state what are the state's rights. It was clearly defined in the Constitution that there are certain roles and responsibilities for the federal government, and everything else was left to the states. Then, just in case that was not understood, it was put into cement in the 10th Amendment, saying, again, restating it, everything that's not here is left to the states. That's one of my responsibilities as a state senator. Now, before the Civil War, when people talked about the United States, they didn't say the United States is. They said the United States are, because they were still thinking of themselves as, and we still should, separate and sovereign states uniting ourselves together to give limited powers to a central government. We now talk about the United States is, but that was United States are, and that was a very valuable way of thinking. Anyway, I wanted to alert you to that particular issue on the changing language of the Supreme Court and that proposed amendment, so that if it comes up and you have a tendency to think, you know, maybe we should ask our own state legislators to run this constitutional amendment for parental rights and put it to the Constitution of the United States, as other states have done, that we need to exercise caution on that and make sure that we maintain our states' rights. Because as I told you in the beginning, we have defined clearly in state statute what the role of the parents is, and what their responsibilities are, and how the schools are there to be supportive. So then the last thing I want to mention as far as state law, having given you that other background, is this past year, our Utah legislature passed Senate Bill 122 that clarifies even further the rights of parents in requesting accommodations to their children's academic environment. Now, this bill says supports parents by requiring schools to reasonably accommodate, and that's a little awkward, but to reasonably accommodate, and these are some of the parental rights. Parental request to advance a child in a grade or hold them back. Sometimes, you know, the schools want to just move the kids forward, maybe not because they're the herdmans, but because they want to say that they want, I'm glad somebody else likes the best Christmas pageant ever, thank you. They moved all the herdmans on just to get them out of their class, right? But sometimes they want to move the kids forward so it doesn't look like they as a teacher failed, or so that they have to have the child there, but the child would benefit from staying. There are other times when the school thinks to hold them back and the parents feel like they should move forward for whatever reason. And so the parental request to advance a child or hold them back is included in that bill. Another one of the parental rights included in this Senate Bill 122 was allowing parents to request teachers. Now that is a very important discussion that was heard earlier today with the presentations that we've heard from the other two gentlemen that presented. I was very, very concerned. As I told you, I cried every day when the first day of school, every year on the first day of school, and my kids went to school. I just couldn't bear that somebody else got to have them all those hours that I wanted. So I was very determined that I wanted to know who that person was and know something about how he or she was teaching my children. So I had the opportunity, not every parent does, but I had the opportunity and the commitment that I went to school every Tuesday as a volunteer all year long and went to my children's classes, and I was a volunteer to do whatever they wanted me to do in their classroom. If they wanted me to spend time alone with readers that needed it, or grade their papers, or change their bulletin boards, or whatever they needed me to do, I was glad to do it to make life easier for those teachers. But it put me in the school setting so that those teachers knew who I was, they knew I cared, and they knew I wanted to know whatever was happening with my child. But it also allowed me to have some understanding of who the other teachers were, so when the end of the year came and I went to the principal's office and said, I really want my child that's moving to go to this particular teacher, it was a little harder for them to tell me no, because how could they ignore the fact that I had given one day of service every week for the whole school year, and that I had volunteered and helped out and done whatever they needed done in the school, and they knew who I was, and I was not a stranger to them, they were not a stranger to me. Now, I wish all parents could do that, and you know, that was pretty sobering to me this morning when you talk about the flip-flop in the Flinders presentation, about how the parents are now supporting the bureaucracy instead of the bureaucracy supporting the parent. I mean, that's basically what I was doing. But I was working within the system, trying to do what was best for my children and trying to make the bureaucracy support me by me being a player and me letting them know, I'm the parent, I want to know what's going on, I want my child in this class, and when there were concerns, I didn't want to hear about it at the end of the year. I wanted to know early on. Okay, I'm sorry, I was listing all the rights in this Senate Bill 122. Sorry, I got distracted. Another one is the parental right to excuse the student from school for family events and excuse the student for illness with a note from the parent and not one from the doctor. I mean, isn't that just a big duh? I mean, you know, if you have a really important event, like maybe, I heard this morning on Red Meat Radio, I don't know how many of you listened to that, but one of the senators was talking to another one of the new senators who had just been elected, and that's Senator Al Jackson. I'm very glad he's there. And he was saying to Al Jackson, now you want to make sure you take your kids out of school on the first day of the legislature and bring them up to the legislature because they have a wonderful pageantry and swearing in and some meaningful events to acknowledge the opening of the legislature. Now you know what? That is reasonable accommodation for those parents to be able to decide, this is something I want to take my child to. But it doesn't even have to be the children of a legislator. I think all children would benefit from going up to the legislature, especially on that first day, and seeing what's happening. And if that's something that you would like to do with your children, now according to this new law, you do not have to go and get special permission to take your children. You can do that. But if it's something you would like to do and it doesn't really fit into your day to take that much time or to worry about the parking, because the Utah legislature is open and transparent, you can watch it all live online with your family. And if you miss it in real time, you can go back and watch it, and it's archived, but I'm sure all of you know how to do that. Utah legislature leads the nation in making all of their legislative decisions and their proceedings public and transparent and available. Okay, another one of the parental rights defined in this new bill is the school requires the school to accommodate as best as possible parent-teacher meetings. What a nice idea. Have the parent-teacher meetings when it works for the parent. Isn't that a nice idea? Maybe because, especially if they work. And allows the parents to opt their children out of statewide testing. That's a nice one, isn't it? We all love that one. Yes. Especially if the testing is not about testing, but is about gathering data about your children and your home, and how many books you have in your home, and how many toilets you have in your home, and if your family votes or whatever. Okay, these are all good things, but you know what? To me, it is really a sad commentary on our society when such obvious elements of parental involvement in their children's education must be put into code. And that's where we are right now. I mean, I have loved the ideas that have been taught. I thought the first presentation this morning was very sobering to see where we have gone in this country from education to where we are now. But I'm glad to share these ideas with you on what your rights are and what parent rights are in code right now, so that we can work within the system that we have to live within right now to try to make it better and strengthen the families and strengthen the voice of parents to make them the voice for their children. I was just going to show you my last favorite slide, which I started with, but I didn't read the one from Thomas Paine. Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must undergo the fatigues of supporting it. I think the fatigues of supporting it not only include all the education you're doing for yourself, but the time you take on a Saturday, which is precious family time, which is precious time off work, which is to come together and talk about the parental rights and agency-based education and get yourself further informed, further educated, because you are interested, so that our freedom, as Thomas Jefferson said, is not lost gradually to the uninformed, the uneducated, and the uninterested. So we must continue to remember that freedom is never more than a generation away. So I thank you all for wanting to be involved, being aware, being educated, and passing it on to your children, and I salute you for that effort. Thank you for your time this morning.